Glad you're here. We're on our second week of our Fragile series. We've been kind of utilizing these shipping themes to consider how the greatest importance of paying attention in life is what's happening on the inside. We said last week we could ship a package and ship it across country, and it could get beat up and dinged up along the way, but if the contents on the inside is good, then we're good. If the contents on the inside is broken, we're crushed because they got damaged along the way, and it's really that way in life. You know, we could have this exterior shell deal with some dings and bruises and damage along the way, but when the inside has been hurt, when the inside is broken, this is where the deepest problems in life exist. And so we're just dealing with this fragility thing that's going on the inside. I want to share with you a little bit today, kind of along this theme of if we were packaging something and we put it in the very best box and the best tape and we were to ship it, you know, we could have that sturdy outside, but if we don't have the right packing on the inside, of course, again, no matter how good the shell is, the thing on the inside could be damaged. And I want to talk about people in our time together who maybe, again, on the outside, they've got, for some of you, this is your story, you have a very good-looking external shell, like maybe you're physically fit, muscle-bound, maybe it's not that, but you look good, you're dressed so, everything's done just kind of perfectly, right? The external looks really great, but there's a mess happening on the inside, and it reminds me, I put this in your notes that, of course, it's always about the outside. I wrote this in your notes. People can seem strong on the outside, but they can be spiritually weak on the inside, and the consequences are tragic. You ever seen somebody, met somebody, had an encounter with somebody, and you thought, man, on the surface, on the outside, it looks like they've got it all together. You got to know them a little bit. They were emotionally and spiritually broken. Anybody ever met these people? Sure, don't point at anybody, please. But again, they can be fooled by things on the outside. There's a guy in the scriptures who I think models this perfectly for what we want to talk about today as we're kind of getting to the heart of the situation. We're going to talk about a guy who was the most, considered the strongest man ever lived, muscle guy in the scriptures. His name is Samson. Samson, strong guy physically, but broken, weak emotionally and spiritually on the inside. Powerful external, impotent internal on the inside spiritually. He had a weakness, Samson did. He had several weaknesses, and instead of dealing with those weaknesses, instead of bringing those weaknesses to God, he left them unchecked. All of us have weaknesses, right? What do we do in those weaknesses? We say, God, where I am weak, I'm bringing them to you, God. You're going to make me strong. Okay, I know I have these weaknesses, and so, God, I bring them to you, and by your power and strength, you will take those areas of my life that are weak, and you will strengthen me on the inside. So that's a promise that God offers us. We all have weaknesses. I was looking at what Peter Drucker said in this famous book about great executives that he wrote. It's called The Effective Executive. And in that book, you know, you understand that, hey, as a business leader, I have weakness. What do I do as a business leader? If I want to be a good executive, I bring in people, all right, that can balance out the areas that I am weak. This makes me more effective because I'm admitting I have weakness and I'm able to then deal with that weakness to become stronger. We do that in our walk with God. If we're living well, if we're living right. If we want to live like Samson, though, it goes unchecked. We're going to learn kind of from the experience of Samson how to live differently in our own lives. Somebody once said, it's always wise to learn from your own mistakes. Somebody else said it's even more wise to learn from other people's mistakes, right? Because you don't want to have to live it out and go through your own mistakes. So why don't you just take time to learn from somebody else? And that's what we're going to do in our time together as we learn from Samson and this sort of mistake-filled way of living, unchecked way of living in his life. Let's look at Samson kind of initially about his story in Judges chapter 13 and verse 24. The woman gave birth to a boy, named him Samson, and he grew, and the Lord blessed him. Right from birth, Samson had anything you and I could ever want. All right, first of all, he had the good looks. He had the strength that was given to him by God. He was raised in a godly family. God had his blessing to be put on his life. He had a supernatural strength. He was voted most likely to succeed in his high school class. That's a big deal. Some of you, sadly, you think that may have happened. But anyways, he had unlimited capabilities, unlimited potential. What do we know about Samson? He blew it. He wasted his life. He lost it all. He became a very broken man, a sad commentary about his life, this journey of a time away from God. What happened to him in his teenage years? He rebelled. He went on his own way. He started doing his own thing. And this moment comes in his life where he's woke up and he's lost everything, including this God-given strength that he had once had in his life. So here's what we're going to do. You'll see how he got there. Look at three things this hundreds and hundreds of year-old text about Samson's life comes to life in the year 2025. I can tell you this, the three things that I'm going to share with you today as a pastor, meeting with people all the time, the three things that I'm going to share with you today encompass about 90% of the brokenness that human beings have in our time today. And so if we can learn from Samson, we get to have something valuable for our lives. Let's walk through this together. Three characteristics that are going to cause you to be vulnerable in an unhealthy spiritual way on the inside. The first one in your notes is this: self-indulgence will weaken your life. Self-indulgence will weaken your life. Unchecked indulgences. This is really living a life without any self-control. Undisciplined living in your personal life. Anything in your life that goes uncontrolled, hear me, weakens you. It just does. All right? And so for some of you, the weakening of your life is happening because, you overspend. You spend money you don't have, right? So if I do that long enough, little by little, these little unchecked things, it's a pile of debt. I'm in all kinds of problems. It causes all kinds of stress and chaos in my life. It was just a little thing that we bought, but then a little thing turned into another thing and another thing. But on the surface, those self-indulgences, they don't seem like much, but then they start to grow, right? Some of you, it's sex. For some of you, it's porn. For some of you, it's food. For some of you, it's alcohol. Maybe it's unchecked emotional health in your outbursts and the way that you live that way. For some of you, it's the way that you manage your time. You don't manage your time. You're not disciplined with it. And so things get out of control in your life because you're not managing your time. Anything that's left unchecked, an indulgence or an unhealthy way of living, it's not brought before God, it goes unchecked, things start to spiral and get out of control. And we all have our little pet indulgences, little things that we turn to at times that seem to go unchecked. And the situation for Samson is his pet indulgence was he was a playboy. He loved women. He just did. He was the ultimate playboy of the Bible. He was sensuous. He was impulsive. And over 3 chapters, we see struggles 3 different women. The third and final one brings everything into full culmination. But this trap that he falls into, again, for him, it's women. For you, you can overlay whatever it is that your indulgences are. You want to stop. You haven't stopped. It's just a little thing. You keep doing it. We're going to utilize his life. Let's look in chapter 14 about Samson. We find this first encounter of the 3 women in the 3 chapters. Judges 14:1 says, Samson went down to Timnah and he saw a young Philistine woman. So right away, what do we know? She's not a believer. She's not of God. She's not of God's people. And so this would be forbidden for him to have a relationship with this woman. But look, when he returned, he said to his father and mother, I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. This is how he operated. If I want it, I get it. His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable young woman amongst our own relatives? In other words, in our great nation of people that God has called us to, our own people, must you go to an uncircumcised Philistine to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She is the right one for me. She's the right one. In a very simple translation, this is kind of the way we could look at this. Let me give you a different translation. The GLT, I don't know if you've heard of it, Gary's Living Translation. Basically, it's, she's hot, I want her. So this is his story, you know. He sees a woman, he says, I've got to have her. This typical excuse that you and I put forth in our indulgences, whatever it may be, is this. I put in your notes. Satan loves it when we operate this way. A weak person's excuse. It's just once. It's just a small thing. It's just a little thing. It's just something little, but we understand as we know the story of life, like a little and another little, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more can in the long run turn into a little, can turn into a crash. I was thinking about that literally early this week, we had a plane that tried to land in Toronto, and if you know the story about this plane, like it hit the runway hard. The altimeter and the measurement of how close they were to the runway was off by just a few feet. Just a little off. But then the crash, this thing hits the ground, flips upside down. Miraculously, I believe to this day, still nobody has died from this incident. I don't even know how, but you look at the plane. Oh, we're just off a few feet. You know, little things can really add up. Little things can lead to a crash. It reminds me of a person who said the story about, hey, I've got a beautiful big bag of seeds that I want to give you to grow a lawn. It's a beautiful bag. And this lawn, if you put this seed down, it'll be the nicest lawn you've ever seen in your life. It'll be spectacular. Now, in every 100 seeds, I put a seed in there that will grow a weed. And that weed will sprout up. But don't worry about the little weed that's going to sprout up. You're getting the 99 of these seeds that are going to be great for your lawn. Well, if you're smart, here's what we all understand. Where there are weeds that infiltrate our lawn, they don't even need to be watered. They just grow like crazy. And they take over the lawn. They eventually consume. And so if you were smart, you'd hear about that beautiful bag of seed to make a lawn, and you'd say, I don't want it if there are weeds that are going to be in it. Why? Because I know it's going to take over. The same thing has to be true for your life. There's these little weeds that sometimes we got to look at and say, that needs to come out, or if I don't, it's going to one day consume everything that I have. People don't take this seriously, all right? And they go from one to the next. It does pile up. It goes unchecked. It leads to brokenness. Galatians 6:7 says, do not be misled. Remember that you cannot ignore God and get away with it. This translation, it's that famous text, God cannot be mocked. A man will always reap just the kind of crop he sows, and if he sows to please his own desires, he will be planting seeds of evil and surely reap a harvest of spiritual decay and death. God cannot be mocked, and you think it's just a little moment, and a little moment of time mismanagement and money mismanagement and food addictions and sex attitudes that are broken, emotions, these things pile up. And so the first lesson we learn in the scripture, through the scriptures and through Samson's life, is strong people will discipline their desires. This is a lesson that we have to learn, that, you know what, here's what strong people do. They bring those desires into check because they know that they will damage them in the long run. Strong people bring their desires and bring them into check. They bring them into discipline. They don't live a life and says, you know what, I'm just going to let it all hang out. I'm just going to do whatever it is that I want. Whatever desires I have, I'm just going to go do them. It's my life, do whatever I want. These unchecked things, they feel like, oh, I'm free, I'll just do whatever I want. They ultimately bring you into a place of being enslaved to your desires and enslaved to the brokenness that your desires have led you to. 1 Corinthians 6:12, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago. Paul says, I will not let anything master me. I'm not going to be owned this way. I'm not going to be owned by my self-indulgences. I could do a lot of things, but I'm not going to be mastered by anything so that I can live a more free way of living in my life. Proverbs 25:28. Anyone who lacks self-control, they're like a city whose walls are broken down. There's no control over their desires. The walls of their life are crumbling. There may be somebody here right now, your self-indulgences, maybe you see it already. Your city walls are crumbling. If you don't see it, it's going to happen at some point. The walls will crumble in your life, and you will be exposed to the brokenness of this world in a way you never have before. So the first thing we see about Samson is he had this indulgent lifestyle, and it was not brought into check, here's the second thing that we see about his life. Bitterness and anger will weaken your life. Last week we dealt a little bit with bitterness, and to be honest, if we were going to do a series about struggles on the inside, we'd probably spend 4 weeks talking about it. It's the number one issue my congregation deals with. Unforgiveness, bitterness, anger about things that have happened in the past. I really just want to focus on the anger side for our time together. Last week I said, hey, a great step for you to take is to release your offender. Many people came forward last week and said, I need to release my offender. And I think that's fabulous. Some of you did that. Others of you did not. Some of you deal with some anger from some things that have happened in your life. Samson had a temper. He was hot-headed. He did some things where he just, in his rage of being angry, did some really hot-headed things. We can see by reading the text that he was pretty hot-headed. In Judges chapter 14, it says, one day in anger, he killed 30 guys because he wanted their clothes. Just wanted their clothes. Over in Judges chapter 15, in verse 3, Samson said, this time I have the right to get even with the Philistines. Verse 7, since you acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. Verse 11, he answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. But can you see that he's got some anger? And he has some anger because the Philistines did some awful things to his family. And so, of course, that anger, you could sense it like, okay, it would be an initial reaction for anybody who's human, but he's living in that anger. It's consuming his life, and his modus operandi through his life was to really just operate out of his anger and his hatred. And I put this in my notes, it's not in yours, but when you spend your entire life reacting to people instead of making your own choices about what God is revealing to you in your future, it does weaken your life. Reacting instead of acting. Reacting is when we're reacting to the damage and the hurt in our life, and we're just in this cycle and we're stuck. Acting on the things of God advances us forward. People who deal with anger, bitterness, rage, hurt, it's there on the inside and it goes unchecked. They stay in that place, we understand that, but they're also missing out on the forward-thinking action that God wants to reveal for you going forward. I merely did what they did to me. That sounds like first grade on the playground. Well, he did it to me first, and so I did it back. But we don't just do that in elementary school. People live this way all their life. I put this in your notes. A weak person's excuse, they hurt me first. They hurt me first. I did to them what they did to me. This is what people think about sometimes when they're stuck and they're hurting and they're broken and they waste a lot of time, they waste a lot of energy, and they waste a lot of creativity in their life. Creativity that could be used for the things of God. They start using that creativity, check it out, to think about ways to get even with other people that have hurt them. It's a waste of energy, absolutely. A waste of energy. People are exhausted from thinking about their pains and their hurts. People, they end the day, they're just completely whipped. They're out of energy. They're more fatigued than ever before. They're depressed. They can't focus in life. They're losing energy. They've lost energy because they're bitter and they're angry. It's a waste of time. I shared this last week, but your offender has moved on. They're doing other things in life and you're still wallowing in it. So it's a waste of time, and it's certainly a waste of creativity. I mentioned that earlier. Our God is a creative God, and he made you in his image. He has made a creative and unique design way for you to live your life. But again, when you're stuck in rage and anger towards somebody else and the pains of that bitterness, you don't see that creativity for your life. Instead, as I mentioned before, you'll do like Samson, which is, let me think of some good ideas to get even. In your mind, in the quiet moments, you start thinking of ways in which you could get even with somebody that's damaged you. This is what Samson did. He got really creative on how to get even. Look what it says in chapter 15 and verse 3. Samson said to them, this time I have the right to get even with the Philistines. I'll really harm them. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. Well, the foxes, I gotta love this. What torture already, all right? Then he fastened a torch to every pair of the tails. He lit the torches. He let the foxes loose in the grain of the Philistine, all right? So they're like on fire. Their tails have become torches. He puts them in the crops, the corn, the wheat, burns it all up, the shocks, that's the piles, standing grain, together with the vineyards and the olive groves. What a creative way to get even. My goodness, this guy's really thought through tying foxtails and putting a torch on them, lighting the crops on fire. By the way, this is where we get the first time ever in human history, something known as a tail light. I don't know if you can get that there. But anyways, chapter 15, it goes on in verse 14. Then another time, it says this, he looked around, he says, oh, there's a fresh jawbone of a donkey. He grabbed it, struck down 1,000 men. Okay, here's another way that I can get even. And the fact is, your anger, your resentment, you're wasting your creativity that God has given you for your life. You're wasting it on these other areas that are consuming you. For some of you, if you had to use that creativity that you have about getting even, put it into something else in life, some of you would be a millionaire right now. Because you got fresh ideas, but you're using them on the wrong things. I put this in your notes. Strong people restrain their reactions. Strong people restrain their reactions. In fact, strong people not only bring their reactions into check, their thoughts into check with God, anger, rage, these things, they channel them at the end of the day into things that can be used for good so that they're not reacting, but they're acting upon something of God. Proverbs 29:22 says this, though. A hot-tempered man starts fights and gets into all kinds of trouble. Your temper gets you in trouble. Proverbs 16:32, it is better to be slow-tempered than to be famous, and to have self-control than to control an army. Samson's life is summarized by being uncontrolled. Now, when we bring our anger into check, I mentioned this before, we can start channeling it into the right things, right? What does the Bible say? Some people say, the Bible says that you can be angry. Yeah, what does it say? It says, be angry, but do not sin. So I can be angry. Of course, God gets angry about things. I'm made in the image of God. There's things that I get angry about. But what do? We channel that into the right things. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and I asked them, why do you serve in the youth ministry? And they said, because you know what? I got so angry at all the fatherless teenagers that we have in our culture today. And it made me upset. And so what did I do? He didn't act out in an ugly way, though he was angry. He channeled his anger into making a difference. And so we can do that. That's a righteous way of handling our anger. We're going to be angry, but we're not going to be sinful and be ugly towards others and be serving up revenge and thinking all of these creative ways to offer revenge. Alexander the Great conquered the world by the time he was in his mid-30s, but he had a temper. He was hot-tempered. And in a fit of rage, he struck his leading general, who also happened to be his best friend. And he's known for saying this quote, I've conquered the world, but I can't even conquer my own soul. His anger was out of control. Proverbs 29:11. A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a man of understanding controls himself. He keeps himself under control. Here's the third and final thing in your notes. Carelessness weakens your life. A careless nature towards your commitments, towards your vows, towards your things that you say like are priority in life. Just a careless way of living. Samson had this gift from God. It was his strength. The gift that God gave him was this incredible superhuman type of strength for his life. And he took that and he treated it with great carelessness. He treated everything in his life with great carelessness. He used this special standing that God had given him in his life and misused it and abused it. He was a miracle baby in the first place. It tells us this in Judges chapter 13. It says this, the angel of the Lord appeared to his parents and said, you're sterile and childless, but you're going to conceive and have a son. And then comes these Nazirite vows. Here it is. Now see to it that you drink no wine, no other fermented drink, And you do not eat anything unclean, because you'll conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite. He's set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. He will begin the deliverance. He has a great opportunity for his life. God has given him incredible opportunity, and he's also going to live out and have the commitment of the Nazarite vow. What is the Nazarite vow? The Nazarite vow, we just saw it in the scriptures. It's, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm going to live in this clean way of eating, diet-wise. And then there's that no shaving of the hair on the head. Why were these vows made? They were made ultimately for the boy as he grows up to constantly recognize his commitment to God and God's commitment to him. And as I see that hair growing, and as I have this clean diet, and as I don't take part in alcohol, I'm reminded, for the Nazarite vow, I'm reminded of the covenant that I've made before my heavenly Father. My life is completely different, and so I'm going to live in this different way of living. Samson has this strength given to him by God, this incredible life before him, but he sold out. He compromised, he gave in, he broke his vows. Samson thought everything was a game. Everything is just the playboy lifestyle. Everything is all about fun. Let's have a good time. Let's live irresponsibly. Constantly toyed with temptation. It could be said about Samson's life that what he did was constantly play with fire and hope he didn't get burned. He came to the edge of the cliff and hoped that he didn't fall off. But if you know the story about Samson, it did come to a very tragic situation in his life. I put this, though, in your notes. A weak person's excuse is this: it will be different for me. Oh, I can play with fire and I won't get burned. I can act like it's no big deal, and God can be mocked. It's no problem. But we discover along the way in life, time after time, that if that's the attitude we're going to take, there's pain, there's struggles, there's brokenness comes along the way. Certainly was the case for Samson. I mentioned before 3 different women in 3 different chapters. The third one that eventually brings things into an ugly situation for his life, he marries Delilah, a Philistine woman, and the Philistine army says, man, we want to know the secret to your husband's strength, Samson. Like, we want to know his secret. Ultimately, what they're looking for is sort of the kryptonite. Like, what can we do to tear this strong man of the Israelites down? What can we learn about him? And so they offer her the equivalent for you and I today would be something like $25,000 to find out what the secret sauce is to his strength. And so, you know, she comes to him and she's going to eventually say, hey, I want to know a little bit about your strength. Here's, though, this moment plays out in Judges 16. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing the secret of his great strength. We'll give you 1,000 shekels of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength. Then what ends up happening is he begins to play some games with her. You know, about 4 different occasions, you know, they go through this thing, and really what he's doing is he's messing with her. He's not really telling her the secret sauce, his strength, and how he can be overtaken. And so it goes on and says this. He says to her, here's the secret. If you bind me with 7 fresh thongs, let me pause right here for those of you reading that. These are straps that have never been dried, and then I'll be as weak as anybody else. So she puts him to bed, has these men of the Philistine army come in. They strap him up, tie him up, gets up in the morning, wakes up, breaks loose. There's these men there. They see that the secret wasn't in these straps that they were going to tie him with. And so he kind of makes his wife kind of look foolish on this journey. She's trying to find out the secret to his strength. She's like, tell me what the secret of your strength is. And so then the next time he's messing with her, he says, you know what? If you get new ropes and you tie me up, those new ropes, that's going to be the deal breaker for me. And so, you know, she gets these ropes and he falls asleep, and they tie him up. He's subdued. They tie him up. Wakes up in the morning, and he breaks through the ropes again. The men are there, and they're like, oh, clearly it wasn't the ropes. And by now you would think like that Samson would get the message. Like, how many times do you have to wake up in the morning and there's strange men standing in your room? But I don't think the elevator goes to the top floor here, right? Like, he's got a lot of bulk, but not a lot of brains. So something's going on, but now here's twice these men are there, and he thinks it's no big deal. Again, he's playing with fire here. He's thinking he's not going to get burned. And so he says, I'll tell you the secret. Braid my hair in these 7 braids, and that'll be the killer for me. You know, this will be the thing, you know, secret to my strength. And so once again, you know, they braid the hair. They do this thing. He's subdued, goes to sleep, wakes up, still has his strength after this 3rd occasion. She's like, you are making a fool of me, telling me these things and playing games with me like this. And so I could imagine she starts shedding some tears, you know, try to get his attention. It says this in verse 16, and with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death, and then she told him everything. Then he told her everything. Samson, we're going to see in this moment, has come to a place where he's compromised one too many times. Remember, God cannot be mocked. And he's broken the vow before God over and over and over again. And finally, we get to this barbershop episode in verse 19. Here's the 4th time. Having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. And then she called, Samson, now the Philistines are upon you. He thinks it's just going to be like before, but he awoke from his sleep and thought this, I'll go as before, I'll shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord, here's one of the most powerful verses in all of the Bible. Let's look at that. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. He'd played with fire one too many times. And now he's in a place, it wasn't about his hair. It was about the consistent breaking of the vow that led him into a very ugly place at this point in his life. And he was unaware that he had crossed that line one too many times. It really is a gradual process, right? Like this is this thing, you know, it's like once, it's just twice, it's just keep testing, just kind of seeing how far I can go. And I want to say that maybe this time together, this message that I'm sharing with you from Samson's life, this particular part is speaking to some of you right now because you've been messing around, you've been pushing it, you've been going against your vow before God, your commitments before God. You keep playing around, and here's this very famous, sobering text, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. He had walked out of that umbrella of God's blessing for his life. And there are consequences that are paid in those moments. I said this last week. Nobody wakes up and goes, I'm going to be an alcoholic today. It's just a little bit. Nobody wakes up and says, oh man, I can't wait to be an addict today. I'm going to start that today. Nobody wakes up and says, I can't wait to be addicted to porn. It's just a little bit and a little bit more. Nobody wakes up and says, I cannot wait to destroy my marriage today. But a little bit along the way. When we do that in our choices in life, we become just like Samson. We come to this very low and broken place. God doesn't want that for us, but I put this in your notes. Here's the secret sauce about life and our journey with God. Strong people keep their commitments. I don't want you to miss that. Secret sauce to life. So let me just rewind the tape so you can hear it. Strong people keep their commitments. Weak people do not keep commitments. They just don't. They're weak in their strength on the inside. They're weak in integrity. But strong people do. They look at their vows and commitments that they've made in life and they protect them and they guard them and they're diligent and they don't go slack and they're not careless. They're serious about their vow and their commitment before God. They're serious about their vow, their commitment in their marriage, their commitment to their family, their commitment to their church, their commitment to their calling. They don't play games with it. They hold fast to their commitments. Samson didn't do that. You know, it's been said, maybe you've heard, a chain is only as strong as its weakest what? Link. I would say this for sure about your life. Your life is only as strong as your weakest commitment. Because you could look like things are going really good on the outside, but if your marriage is crumbling, things are going to start crumbling. You could think that, you look good on the outside, but if you don't have a strong vow in your walk with God, things can crumble. You're only as strong as your weakest commitment in life. And so the people who are living stronger in life, not just on the outside, but really all where it counts on the inside, they value their commitments. But Samson was only committed to one thing, and that was himself. His pleasures, his desires. I'll do whatever I want to do, and whenever I feel like it, I'll see it, I want it, I take it. If I want a woman, I'll take her, I'll have her. If it feels good, I'll take it for sure. And this life of undiscipline ultimately causes him to be enslaved. And I think that's an important reminder to you and I. Again, we will be enslaved to the things that have led to our undisciplined life. Discipline brings freedom. Samson never prayed about anything. God was just an afterthought for him in his life. What's the weak link in your life? What vow or commitment have you made before that you're waning on a little bit? You're not being serious about your vow or your commitment. There was a tragic result for Samson. Judges 16 and 21. Then the Philistines, they seized him. They gorged out his eyes. They took him down to Gaza. They were binding him in bronze shackles, and they set him to the grinding in the prison. Someone once said, sin is binding, blinding, and grinding. And literally, that's exactly what it is here for Samson. The great champion of Israel, with all of his muscle and his might, has become a clown. People mock and make fun of him now because they got him. He lost his power. He lost his potential. He lost his freedom. He lost his influence. He lost it all. He was not serious about the important things in life. But here's not just a warning that we get from this text, but there's also a hope and there's a promise. And maybe you're here today and you can sense that the indulgence and the bitterness, the brokenness, the careless living has led you down an unhealthy road. Certainly can learn lessons from Samson, but the good news is found in the second chance opportunity in verse 22. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. The hair did not represent, again, his strength. The hair was a picture of his commitment before God. And here's what we know about Samson. We know that he had a lot of time, in the prison, and he's blinded in the darkness of where he was in life. He had a lot of time to reflect on his life and to see that he had made a royal mess of the life that he had been living. He had made a miserable mess. But the good news of verse 22 is that the hair began to grow again, and it's a portrait of him having this time and this opportunity to say, God, I want to turn back towards you. I want to return towards you. It's the portrait of second chances, folks. It is the message of Jesus Christ. That our God is a God of second chances, and though you may be going down an unhealthy road in your life, that at any moment you can turn around and say, I know I have a God of second chances, and if I will renew those vows and renew those commitments before God, He can start bringing His strength back to me going forward in my life. They took Samson in another occasion to make fun of him in this temple. They're going to tie him up in the temple and mock this clown, and so he says, hey, would y'all tie me up with these pillars? Hey, would you tie me up to these pillars, and whatever you're going to do to me, tie me up to these pillars. And so they take his hands and they tie him up to these pillars. And what they don't know is during this time, he's had this recommitment with God, and God has brought back his strength. And in that moment, he takes those pillars and he has this last prayer before God that in his strength, he could ultimately honor God and deal with the enemy, the Philistines, the way God would have wanted for his life to be utilized in the way God had set out for his life. And so he grabs those pillars and he rips those pillars down, and the roof falls in. The Bible says that in that moment, about 3,000 of the army was destroyed, the enemy army, on that day. In that last moment, God showed him that picture of what it could be like for him in restoration of strength. It's the picture for you and I as well, that I can turn to him and he will renew the strength in my life. As I close, let me just share with you one last thing. I don't know if you're aware of it, but in Hebrews chapter 11, we have the heroes of our faith. And they're listed out. It's great for you. If you read that chapter, you can see the heroes of our faith. And it wouldn't surprise you if from the Old Testament, Moses was in there. And it probably wouldn't surprise you that Abraham's in there. And it probably wouldn't surprise you that Noah is there. But Samson's there as a hero of the faith. In the portrait that at any moment, because of Jesus Christ, you can come back home and have your strength restored and fulfill the promise that God had for you in your life. And so I love that. Hope it resonates with you in this series as we continue on. I want to pray for you now. Father, we are reminded of an old ancient text that yet comes to life for you and I and all of us here, for God, for all of us here in this room in the year 2025. Indulgences, bitterness, anger, undisciplined, careless living. Yeah, it's still a thing. And it still leads to brokenness. Maybe there's somebody here and they see it right now. There's an indulgence that's gone unchecked and they're going to bring it before God starting today. Maybe somebody here there's a bitterness and anger and they're so creative in the ways that they want to get even and wasting and spending all of that energy on things that could be used for God and His glory. And so maybe somebody's bringing that bitterness into check at the feet of Jesus here today. And perhaps you're somebody in our audience that it's been a careless living. Maybe there's a vow you've made before God and you're drifting from that vow. You're ignoring that vow. You're treating it like it's a game or maybe a toying of that vow. God, you're calling them to come back home and the restoration of that commitment of that vow. Perhaps there's somebody here today in our time together and you came and joined us and the reality is for you, and if you'd just be honest where you are right now, you are living in all of these things, or certainly a majority of them. You've got a bitterness or you've got an undisciplined way of living. You're caught up in indulgences. And I just want to tell you, sir, ma'am, young person here in this room, 100 times out of 100, that way of living leads to brokenness. And you could even have a successful looking situation on the outside, but on the inside, it leads to brokenness. It just does. Certainly eternally. So if you're ready to stop going your own way and doing your own thing in your own life, you want to have a relationship with God, He says, I am the God of second chances. The opportunity to come home to the Father. It's here today before you. You just turn to God and say, God, I receive the forgiveness of sin. As I surrender to you, I accept the gift of your one and only Son, Jesus, who did indeed die on the cross, rise from the dead, ascended into heaven. What He did on the cross, though, was so that my sin could be forgiven, that I could be washed clean and have a relationship with God, with you today, God. I'm ready to start doing it your way in life. I don't understand how this works, but I just know this, that you offered forgiveness for my sin, and I am ready to receive that today. God, I'm going to learn about this life that you have for me in eternity. And I'm going to start that today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.